Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
And my name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
It's your night, Josh. It's your man.
Oh my
Here
gosh.
we go.
I'm so happy. Oh,
Fincher fanatic is what I kept thinking about you. Fincher fanatic. He's going to be so satisfied.
this gave me an excuse to rewatch a bunch of David Fincher movies and re-listen to a bunch of David Fincher commentaries. Not that I need an excuse.
I was going to say, come on now. Use the language properly. There is no need. It is a must.
But I did it. So what I've been doing, like in previous times when we've talked about the auteur filmmakers, what I would consider him an auteur filmmaker, even though he doesn't actually co-write any of his movies, he's never gotten a screenwriting credit on any of his movies, which is interesting. But as far as he's concerned, I in the past with other filmmakers, I've done a chronological. I did this recently with Quentin Tarantino. I'm starting with Reservoir Dogs, and I'm going to move on from there. But with Fincher, what I did was I did reverse chronological order. So I started with Mank, and then I moved backwards to Gone Girl, and then I only got to like Girl Dragon Tattoo. So I didn't get that far, but it was good though. And he makes himself accessible as far as like his views and the interviews that he does. And he doesn't shy away. The fact that he does filmmaker commentaries up until he started doing movies for Netflix, but he does filmmaker commentaries to where he gives you an opening into like what he's thinking about when he's making the movies. And so that excites me, and it gives me a little bit more of a backstory to like the decision that he's making as a director. So I eat all that stuff up. So I really feel bad that he doesn't have a director's commentary for Mank, and it looks like he probably won't have one for The Killer, which is the movie we're talking about today. But it's like a warm blanket, David Fincher. So what about you?
I need for you to think about that statement for just a split second.
No, I'm not going to.
The opening credits alone are like the most disturbing James Bond opening credits ever. That's
the worst part of the movie. That is the worst part of the movie.
Okay.
I don't like the font. I don't like the
You're talking about The Killer?
Yes.
Okay, I will agree with you. I think, okay, you're so passionate. I love it. You're so like not me most of the time. And then when we talk about somebody like Fincher or somebody, you're just like, I do not disagree with you. I wouldn't say it was the worst part, but it does not hold up to what we have been used to. And it was just a tad bit of disappointment because of two reasons. The length of it, and the choices were so obvious. But then I saw the film twice.
Okay.
I have something to tell you about how I saw it a second time, which was very interesting. Kind of three times, I'll be honest with you. But I'll tell you about the third. But then I realized that this is a minimalistic take on a Fincher film or a character study by David Fincher. Usually it's much more complex and much more layered, and there's many more subplots and small narratives going on and many more characters. This is a very, very stripped down version of what David Fincher has done in the past. That said, that brings me to my first question. Why did he make this movie? What was it about this movie that he wanted to make? And then we could talk about my 2.5 times watching it in just a second.
Yeah. That's a good question. And I think that the first thing I wrote down when I started writing down notes, so I saw it in the theater, which I really enjoyed a lot. Alamo played it here, and I was glad that they did that before it came out on Netflix. I've seen it 3 times also. But so the first thing I wrote down was a lean, sinewy film. It's very lean, much like the main character, the killer, played by Michael Fassbinder. And there's not an ounce of fat on the movie, and there's not an ounce of fat on Michael Fassbinder.
I'm glad you brought it up because I don't want to talk about body image, but it is very interesting that you brought that up in context of the film. Sorry to interrupt you, but they should do scientific studies on him because how is he walking around as a human being? Because he is so lean. It's a little bit disturbing in a way, not to judge anybody, too thin, too overweight.
You know why, right?
Why?
He's a Formula One racer.
Oh,
like the last movie that he shot was in 2019, and it's the movie that just came out, the Taika Waititi movie, Next Goal Wins,
right? That
just came out a couple weeks ago, but it was shot back in 2019. He hasn't shot a movie since before COVID,
because
and the whole time he's been doing F1 racing,
of course,
like Formula One racing.
Okay, it all makes sense.
And he's married to Alicia Vikander, so like, I mean, that's just.
He's got no time to eat because he gets to. Is that what you're saying?
That's just his life, you know? He has no time to eat. No, he has no time to eat. But in this movie, it works perfectly though, because
Perfect.
the way that they just, and especially that first like 15 minutes of the film, that first kind of act, if we want to like break it down into acts or whatever sections, that first act in Paris he's the most efficient with all of his actions, whether it's sleeping or whether it's eating, you know, taking the bread off of the Egg McMuffin and eating it.
I do the same thing.
You do. Oh.
I do, except for this is why I'm not as thin as him, because I'll buy two and I'll take the toppings off of the first one and the top off of the second one and put those together, and I'll eat the bottom with the meat and the cheese from the first two. Does that make sense?
Okay,
in other words,
yeah.
he took it and just ate it like that.
I just got like ham hands. Like, why? No, you don't need, no.
Well, you
gross.
get ham hands the way I eat it too, but just the top part. And also, I have a huge thing about wasting food. So if I'm going to order something with bread, I'm going to eat it because I don't want to waste food. That's my excuse. I'm sticking to it. But I will eventually freeze the other three halves, and I will eventually eat those along the way, somewhere down the line when I'm not like feeling too carb overload. But anyway, when he did it, I was like, I get
you
that.
Do you.
I was like, I can relate to a serial killer.
Well, it's that, and also the interesting you call him a serial killer. That is we got to get into that. But the fact that he eats those like weird, which I've never bought these packages of hard-boiled eggs because
I love them. I do it all the time.
It's so weird.
It's not weird.
I will make hard-boiled eggs and I will eat them. I don't have a problem, but that's the exact point. It's efficient. Like he needs X number of grams of protein per day, and that's how he's going to get it. All of it, his disguise, whatever it is, you know, he picked something, it works. He uses it throughout the whole film. The bucket hat, the sunglasses, all that modeled after a German tourist, whatever. But that whole thing, everything is about efficiency. And the beginning of the movie, we are ushered into his world. We are given the narrator treatment in this film, much like other David Fincher films where there are narrators. But then once you realize that much like other David Fincher films, he is not a reliable narrator, in that he is selling a version of himself that does not line up with reality, because the first thing we see him do, the first act we see him do is a mistake. It fails.
Right.
So I think that right there is where David Fincher locked in, and is probably where Michael Fassbinder locked in. Because it's like, what is it? Because really, when you look at this whole movie and you look at the plot of the movie, like, what is the hook? Like, what is the character arc? Like, it seems like and this is also based on a French graphic novel / comic book series by Matt, who is the comic book writer. And it's a while ago, and it's been in development for a long. And so David Fincher finally got this made with the script from Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote Seven and has also been his kind of like back pocket script doctor for a lot of his films since Seven. But this character right here, I can see why they would all have been interested in it, because it's not a clean character arc, but it's a cleaving of that character. Like it's a complete marker in that character's life. And so it's been a certain thing throughout his whole life up until this point. And now once he's at this point where every other time when he said stick to the plan always came to fruition, but now the plan has not, and he has to improvise, and he has to deal, and he has to figure out how much emotion and he's going to let in, and how much of his mantra that he is going to stick to, and whether he's going to be able to do that or not. And we find out through the movie that it doesn't happen. He gets feelings. Yeah,
he totally does. He has feelings, which was a shocking moment for me in the best way. I don't think he's an unreliable narrator. I think that he is talking to himself and repeating what his patterns are to himself. Because at first I thought, he's unreliable because he missed. Now what? But then he repeats the same things over. Stick to the plan. Don't get emotional. All of the things we've already at this point seen him have to deal with, in being emotional, not being able to stick to the plan, changing the plan, then coming up with a new plan. So he's not necessarily, for me, an unreliable. I don't disbelieve what he's saying, but I believe he has to repeat that to himself because that's part of his regiment. And I think that's also like Baby Driver, the guy who has to listen to the music with the screaming in his ear, or the tinnitus.
Tinnitus.
Yeah, whatever. The ringing, it's to block it out. I think that's what it's like exercising. You know that you have to do a certain thing before you actually lift weights, stretch out, do yoga, whatever it is. And you have to structurally do it the same way. And then the only thing you change about lifting weights is how much weight you're lifting or what muscle you're working at, but you still kind of religiously stick to the same thing. Because one, structure is a good thing with exercising. And I think that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to convince himself he's trying to say over and over again to himself, this is how he's actually getting through these moment to moment things, because he's like, do this, do that, do this. Because at first it sounds like he's giving advice to us on how to be him, but it's not. It's not.
It's so much easier to do this, to be me.
Right.
No.
But later on, it dawned on me he's talking to himself. That's my opinion. I don't know if that's true, but that makes it way more interesting for me, because at first I was like, wait, he missed that right there. That moment right there is, and it's been done before, but this movie is filled with done before. Seen it 1,000 times. There's 1,000 things that happen in this movie. Buying ground beef, putting sleeping aids in it to make a dog fall asleep. It's in every movie like this. Yeah. And it will be for the end of time. But that missing and his way of reacting is brand new and fresh to me. It's what pulled me in.
But even that, like every single section of this movie, whatever we're calling them, acts, whatever, every single section of this movie, he ends up making a mistake, quote unquote. Things don't go as he has planned every single time. And so we get to be audience to that. At the beginning, it's that he misses the shot, but then he figures out a way to get out of it. But even that dog thing, like if he would have put the correct amount of whatever, the NyQuil or whatever it is, he would have put the correct amount of sleeping aid into that ground beef, that dog would not have woken up when the dog woken up, and he wouldn't have had to deal with that dog. It's all of these things. The fact that he didn't know that there was a security system in that guy's house. I mean, we're getting into some spoilers. The movie is on Netflix. We'll go watch it right now if you have a Netflix account. But I'm just using these as examples of like, these are situations that we are privy to, that in a movie where you have a main character, hero, whatever. I mean, he's not a hero. You called him a serial killer, but he's an assassin. So in this movie, like, we're expecting to see assassins do perfect things perfectly and be most efficient and be this like, example of professionalism. But we don't get any of that. It's sloppy because the world is sloppy, life is sloppy, and so we get into that. It's not as clean cut as a Hollywood movie would be, and that's where I can dig in, and I really do enjoy that. And when you think of a lot of the movies that David Fincher has made, it's exactly the same stuff, and so that's where I engaged. I engaged once he messed up. Well, even when he goes to the lawyer in New Orleans, he has a calculation of how long that this guy, he knows exactly what he's doing and the timeline of what he's doing, but then that all gets thrown out the window when he hits the guy with the nails. So yeah, every single time he has an idea.
But I wouldn't say it was messy, and I wouldn't say that he necessarily screwed up because he was messy. I would say, and I like your analogy about, because human beings are not perfect and human existence is not, it's messy. But I would say that he is calculated, but for whatever reason, and I guess we can figure out what that theme is about and what Fincher wants from us and what Michael Fassbinder wants from us. But it's not that he is messy, it's that it does not go the way he has calculated it. So I don't think that it's messy per se, because he's very pristine about the choices that he makes, and he's very pristine. And you know that when he meets certain people, you know how this is going to end. You just don't know how it's going to end at the time. You know it. You know what his intention is. And I don't think that miscalculation of how much Tylenol PM or whatever it was that he put into the ground beef, I don't know if that was necessarily messy. It was just a miscalculation, which is exactly what happens when he's focusing in the beginning of the film, or when, this is later on in the film, it's not necessarily a spoiler, but when Tilda Swinton slips, that's a miscalculation that he actually takes advantage of on some level. So
he corrects for it. Yeah.
He corrects for it. So I meant to say this at the beginning of the podcast, but I actually think this, and I don't know if this is some kind of criticism, it's not in my opinion, but I actually think that this is almost autobiographical from Fincher's point of view. I think this is how he makes movies. And his result, and he has a macabre, he has a very graphic nature, he has a very gory nature. He has done how many films that have 7 just as like about 20 films in one when it comes to graphic nature, and what he pulls no punches. The point to that is that I feel like Fincher is very meticulous and very much he structures everything. And the DVD extras that I've heard him where he's talking about, you let me see Panic Room once, and I watched all of that stuff. And the way his language is and the way he structures how he needs to have things done is very much like how Michael Fassbinder talks throughout the narration of this film. So I'm not comparing David Fincher to a murderer or assassin or a serial killer. I'm saying that the meticulous nature of a creative mind like that comes across to me like that's how Fincher feels about making movies, and that the human beings are the ones who make the mistakes, and that's why he has to recalculate. The human beings, remember when he in Panic Room and he's walking by and they're playing basketball, he kind of joins in for a split second, but then he's like, I've got work to do. And he kind of has this attitude like, I think you should be working too, not playing basketball. And they're kind of like, there's a hoop in here. Of course we're going to play basketball. But he's like, okay, well, get back to work sooner than later. That is not at all what the conversation is like. But that's an example of how he seems very meticulous and very strategic. And I guess he'd have to be on some level in order to make these types of movies. But when I was watching it, I was like, oh, this is not about a killer. This is about Fincher and his art form. Whether or not it's meant to be and whether or not he thinks that way, that's how it came across to me. So the second time I watched it from that point of view, which was, it was interesting. It kind of matches up. It kind of matches up. You will have a certain screenplay, a certain screenplay is going to go this way. And then all of a sudden somebody drops out of that, that you wanted to cast. So you have to pivot and it changes everything. It's kind of like the first attempted murder. It's kind of, I don't know, maybe that's just me reading into it, but
I get it. And it's very procedural too. Like, and there's
clinical is what I said.
Yeah. There are movies out there that are very procedural movies. I mean, a lot of detective movies are procedural movies, but yeah, clinical is another thing that people have used to describe Fincher movies, but sometimes that has a negative connotation as like unemotional. And I think this movie is trying to have emotions, but it's trying to fit them into this particular character, which is probably convenient to David Fincher. But I think that the procedural portion of this, it's like you have to get from point A to point D, but to do that, you have to go to point B and you have to go to point C. Whether it's picking up a rental car and showing your new credit card that says Felix Unger or, Archibald Bunker or, all of those things.
Ruben Kincaid. Ruben Kincaid is where, do you know who he is? Do you know who Ruben?
That was the only one that I didn't know. Was that
he's
from
the manager of from the Partridge Family. Yeah.
Okay.
When they said Mr. Kincaid, I went, and then I saw Ruben and I was like, wait, were they all? And then I was like, wait, Bunker.
Oh yeah.
Oh wait, was George Jefferson in there too?
Yes, at the very end when he was closing out his bank account. Yes.
Well, that's twofold to me. I know you had a thought, and I'll let you finish it, but that's twofold for me. What that says to me is that people who are 20 years or younger, or even 30 years and younger, don't have a clue who those people are. So Michael Fassbender's character can get away with that because people who are not my age don't know those references. Because I picked right up on it. I was like, clever. And now I know how old David Fincher is. Like I knew, of course. But you can tell. But yeah,
Yeah, there was it was Lou
Archibald,
Grant.
right?
Yeah,
Mary
Oscar
Tyler Moore.
Madison
Yeah,
from
right.
Felix and Oscar, so
Yeah.
from The Odd Couple. So
Yeah.
I mean all that stuff. I mean it was good. It was a neat little peppering of that. But they showed each of those pieces, and they showed all of the, like every single place he picked up a rental car, every single place. You know, they showed him cleaning out the back of the van in New Orleans. I mean it's the throwing away the license plate. Like this is something that needs to happen. So it's kind
What was
of
he
like,
spraying? What did he spray?
It was probably bleach.
That's what I thought too. Yeah, because he spits his toothpaste and he squirts
Yes.
bleach, and he does that somewhere else too, not the toothpaste.
Yeah, and he
but
always has his metal cup because he never drinks out of a cup that he throws away because that would have his DNA on it. It's little stuff like that where you're just kind of like, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously David Fincher's thought about this a bunch, and Andy Kevin Walker, the screenplay writer. And so like that right there, it just tells you that like there's going to be things where it's like, wait, but we don't have an answer for this. We don't have an answer for that. He's not going to got in his movies. You know, you're not going to be able to come back to David Fincher and be like, what about this? Nobody ever thought about that. And it's like, well, actually we did. You know, the sound design on this, he of course used Ren Kleiss, who he's used a bunch in the past, but the sound design of this movie they're very specific about how they utilize sound and how it gets married with the score from Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor, and which was so sparse in this movie. And there were times when
that's my imitation.
Yeah,
of the score.
I would expect it to be a little bit more involved in this movie, you know, driving or something like that. But it's not. Like it's very sparse, and it's very machine-like and inorganic, and just and it really reminded me of some of the scenes from some of the really nasty scenes from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, where there's just, and also Gone Girl, you know, when Neil Patrick Harris gets. So, I mean, it's these kind of like ripping and crunching, and it seems like it's this audible angst that is happening, and that it's this, it gets you all out of sorts.
Okay, so this is a good point for me to explain exactly how I've seen it actually twice. So I saw it the first time, right? And then I wasn't feeling well, so we didn't do the podcast when we were supposed to. And you had said before the podcast that actually worked really well because you could explore the movie again. So I decided I was going to watch it again a second time. And I was like, but wait, I'm curious. I'm never keyed in on the score. I'm never keyed in on all these things that Josh talks about. So what I did is I put the movie on, and I put on my big speaker thing. I always want to say, I can't remember what kind it is, JL6 or whatever it is.
JBL.
Yes, thank you. See, the gray hair people deal with it. And I turned it up loud, and I was just going to watch the movie with the speaker on. And then I found myself wanting to get up and do chores and not pay attention to the movie. And that's exactly what I did. So I listened to it like it was a score. And here's the brilliance of this movie, in my opinion. I saw it once at this point, and I knew exactly where we were at in the film by the sounds I was hearing. Not necessarily anything other than cars or planes or certain small things where you might not know, but there are a lot of silent moments in this film. And that's when you hear that one note and that all starts, the score actually starts after the mistake. It's not there until the Smiths are there. Yeah, everywhere actually in this film. So I listened to it a second time, and I actually was visualizing what was happening in the film as I was doing my dishes or whatever. And that was one time seeing it. And the second time that I saw it, I broke it up. So I watched the first chapter, wherever you want to call it. And then I took a break. And then I came back to watch the second chapter, and so forth and so on. Now, sometimes I watch fourth, fifth, whatever, in a row. And I did that because I wanted to see how emotionally disconnected or connected I would be breaking it up like that. And the power of the film is it affected me just listening to it and watching in segments a third time as it did the first time I saw it. And I thought, that's a powerful filmmaker right there. Somebody who takes the visual away and you still understand what's going on in the movie from seeing it one time. Or breaking it up so you have, a 2023 break in between, you know, Back to the Phone or whatever. You know, I wanted to see what it would be like to watch that as if that was a habit of mine. And it still pulled me in. It still like had me. And it still was an emotional ride for me, even breaking it up like that.
Yeah, and it even works as, I mean, you know, nobody has cable anymore, really, it seems like, but it even works as like a movie that you would turn on cable that would be like in the third act or whatever, and you're like, oh yeah, it's fine. You know, I can just watch the rest of the movie. No big deal. Like, I already kind of know, I really remember what happened before this. I'll just keep watching through there. Or even if you wanted to watch just like the segment in New Orleans, or you just wanted to watch the segment in Miami, or you just wanted to watch, the house fight, you know, with him and that big dude slamming each other around, and, you know, and a bunch of blood and all that stuff. I mean, if you wanted to just watch that, or if you wanted to just watch the amazing scene that was Michael Fassbinder sitting across the table from Tilda Swinton, I mean, you can just watch that, and that's like a 10-minute, 15-minute segment that you could just watch that and then move on. I mean, that's a YouTube clip. That's essentially what it is. So you could watch each of those, and it would give you a certain amount of satisfaction as far as the narrative, what the character's going through in each of those things. But then you can string them all together, and it can be something that you can watch. It's not something that you have to be steeped in. It's not something that like, oh, I really didn't see the beginning of Zodiac, so the end of Zodiac doesn't really mean as much right now.
And that's exactly what I did. And
yeah.
I didn't know that that's what I was going to do. And I didn't know that that's exactly what you just explained is exactly what I did the third time. Because I wanted to see how emotionally disconnected, just in general. And I thought, well, the movie's kind of sterile, for lack of a better term, and it's kind of clinical, and it's kind of rigid. So maybe that will be the reason why I disconnect from it. But from the moment I turned the scene on, I was engaged. From the moment the scene ended, I was able to disengage and then come back to it, which was a surprise to me, because sometimes you can't do that with certain films. Like you were saying, you don't need to see the beginning per se. Side note, back to the fight really quick with the creatine guys. Is that what they said? Maybe creatine should be illegal.
Yeah.
The creatine twins or whatever they called them, which I laughed out loud. Is that scene reminiscent of the Edward Norton scene where he beats himself up in Fight Club in the boss's office? Because he goes through a glass table, and maybe it's just what you do in a fight sequence. And I'd like to watch them back to back, because it's like when he hits the table and he hits that shelving unit, which looks a lot like the one in Fight Club. It's almost like what it was like for Edward Norton doing it by himself, but Michael Fassbinder was doing it with somebody actually beating him up. It's almost like it's the same movements. I don't know. Maybe that's just because I'm in love with Fight Club and that's on my mind, but that shelving unit is very similar to the one he falls into in Fight Club. Very similar.
I think that Fincher was more interested in the geography of the house. It's made in a circle, so that the way they start is he's in the bedroom. Then immediately his gun gets kicked underneath the bed, and then they kind of move into the bathroom, and then they move into the living room, and then they move into move into the living room, then the kitchen, and then so ultimately when he reaches into that kitchen drawer and pulls out a cheese grater.
Yeah, that was great.
I didn't pull out a knife. And so
that was great. Every time I see a cheese grater, I'm going to think about that.
So he uses it as a distraction just so that he can get back to his gun. I think that they're trying to like give you the lay of the land. In my opinion, that's what I felt, is that they were trying to give me the lay of the land of like each of these things, and also have a dynamic fight too, and also put him against somebody who's 75% larger than he is. I mean, like that guy that he's fighting, he's got to be 240 pounds. I don't know. And he can't be more than 140 pounds, 150 pounds maybe. But so like, and he's having to utilize all of his skills as an assassin and whatever to fight through all these things. And then he finally is able to get back to the gun. But yeah, okay. I think that was kind of the exciting part for Fincher, probably.
And I agree with you, but 5 years from now, when he does reveal that he mirrored the Fight Club sequence, you can call me a genius film watcher. And it will have to be on a t-shirt. You have to give me a crown that says genius film watcher. Watch.
Paul, the genius film watcher.
See how easy it is for you to say that? That's not that hard, really. It's not that hard.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
Well,
It looks a lot alike. I'm just saying.
No, that is kind of neat. I mean, it would be neat if he has some sort of like through line of all of his films. He's like dropping in, like Panic Room things into Benjamin Button somehow. It's like, how would that work? But hey, whatever works. So I did want to talk about like how each of the segments was as dynamic as they were. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the casting, like putting Charles Parnell in there, Arliss Howard, and of course Tilda Swinton in there in a lot of these scenes that are dialogue heavy, being able to lean on those characters. And he'd obviously used Arliss Howard recently in Mank, but I think this is the first time No, of course. Tilda Swinton was in Benjamin Button, of course.
It's just the best moment in that movie.
Well, I mean, Cate Blanchett, you can't discount her.
You can't discount any of it, and I adore and love and worship that movie. I love that movie, but when you see her as an older woman after she actually swims the channel and she does that thing where she's like, it's going to kill me a little bit. It is really, for me, the moment of the movie. Okay. It's what the movie means to me. Anyway, of course, I'm not going to discount Cate Blanchett.
Okay. All right. Well, it's not an either
Tilda
or
Swinton in
also.
a fight would kick her ass, but I mean, that's because
I'm sure she would. Yeah.
Tilda Swinton's a vampire, so she is. She's been one.
I understand. I mean, you give her to Jim Jarmusch and see what he does to her.
That's it. Mud wrestling between Cate Blanchett and Tilda Swinton in a Jim Jarmusch film. Only he could do that and get away with it, actually. And
only they would agree to it. If he
and I would respect it and not think it was some kind of weird kitschy thing. Anyway, go ahead.
When you've got a character who doesn't speak very many lines, you need to have somebody on the other end who's going to reflect that energy, like who's going to oppose that energy. Whether it's Charles Parnell playing the lawyer, who's just kind of like, he's just incredulous. He's like, this isn't even real. What you're doing right now is not even real. It's not even in the realm of possibility. And that's that kind of like, because each of these people are going to die, and he knows that. Well, except for Arliss Howard, but each of these people are going to die. And they know it, they know that it's a very good chance that they're going to die. And then so they, you figure out how they're going to react to that. And whereas Charles Parnell is like, you got to think through what you're doing. This is absurd what's happening. That's his angle. The angle of Tilda Swinton is just kind of like, well, it's been a good ride, and I'm going to fight to the end, but I'm also going to make you feel it. Like you normally would be able to be way far away from your victims and not have to interact with them and not even have to get to know them. But I'm going to make you feel what you're about to do to me. And so and there is a little bit of that twinge where she kind of offers him a drink at the beginning of their conversation and he doesn't even react. But then by the end of their conversation, he ends up drinking. He's letting her know that she's getting to him a little bit, but doesn't mean he's not going to go through with it. But at the same time, it's just kind of like there's a little bit of humanity, for lack of a better word, in the character at that point.
Dignity.
That he's kind of like, and also the fact that she's kind of like, psychoanalyzing him because she's in the same position as him. Like she was in the same position as him in doing what she was doing. So she's kind of sharing all of that wisdom at the last moment to be like, hey, I know I'm done, but maybe you need to think about it and think about what you're doing, which is really, it's a novel concept when you could expect her to be able to think that she was going to do anything that she could to stay alive. She had kind of like moved on past that. And you get that sense of calm somehow in that character, even to the fact where she's able to tell this like sprawling story about the bear and the hunter. And
that's great. The best part though, is one of the last lines that she has when she says, knowing that the end is this close, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, which is ironic because of all the things she's possibly done and all the things that he's doing, that they've done the worst thing to their, not to necessarily to their enemy. I mean, I don't know what her background is, but she starts that speech out with all the things that I've done. I was surprised at how easy it was for me to do it. Is basically what she says in the beginning. So when she says that at the end, it's interesting because you're supposed to be sympathetic to her as an audience member watching a character who realizes in the next couple of minutes she's probably going to be dead, and she's aware that she's going to be dead, and she's introspectively realizing she wouldn't wish it on her worst enemy, but yet she's done really bad things to people, which has caused them to have tragedy and the families to have tragedy and people who know them and so forth and so on. That's okay. But she wouldn't wish this on her worst enemy, which is an interesting barometer for the way that a person's mind might think who are in those situations. Okay, so side note, because I meant to ask you this in the beginning, and now that we're kind of here, after he meets the lawyer, does he not know before that, when he goes to the Dominican Republic, does he know that they're going to come after him? Because wouldn't he know that this was the process? Wouldn't he understand that if you missed, it's got to be part of his knowledge, right?
I don't know. I don't know.
So
I mean,
why would he not be precautious or cautious and call her or call the house or call somebody and say, get out of the house. You know, they're coming for me. They're going to take you out if you're there, so forth and so on. I mean, we wouldn't have a movie, but wouldn't he know that?
I mean, maybe it's hard to tell because you're right. The lawyer does say, like, you knew we were going to come after you. You knew this is what.
Yeah.
But I don't really know. I mean, I think I kind of go back to, I rewatched Gone Girl and seeing Amy go back to the house after she, you know, it's close to the end, spoilers for Gone Girl. She goes back to the house and she has a bunch of blood on her. And it's like, she had just been to the hospital and they checked her out. Why wouldn't they have cleaned off all of the blood off of her? Well, it makes the scene where she gets into the shower and washes off all the blood. It makes that kind of like less cinematic. So they just like let it happen, which is funny because it's a David Fincher movie and, you know, he's got all the answers. But like that stuck out for me when I watched Gone Girl and when we talked about it, I think too, we talked about it. But this is a similar thing where you're like,
I'm not 100% sure you're right about that. I'm not sure they would wash all that blood off. Why
would they not?
Because
they did a full workup on her to determine whether she'd been raped or not.
Because why would they? If they determine there's no cuts, there's other things that are more important or where the blood is coming from. That's one. And I have been in the emergency room and I have had a large cut all the way down my arm and they put antiseptic on it and never washed it off. Never.
Okay.
And when I went, the orderly went, that'll wash off with soap and water. That's what he said to me. So maybe not. I mean, it is very dramatic, and it is probably for the shower scene and for the ode to Alfred Hitchcock with the blood going down the drain and all that other stuff from, you know, any tub with blood in it is now his. I mean, it is. So, but I'm not 100% sure that's accurate because they've got 1,000 other things they're trying to do to keep your life intact. I don't know if they'd give you a sponge bath.
It worked out for the film, and I think in the same way that it works out for this film, the fact that his girlfriend didn't know anything about it, and his girlfriend was caught unawares, and she was tortured and hurt, and that's ultimately, you know, that's the rest of the movie. If you don't have that, you don't have the rest of the movie.
Absolutely.
So, yeah,
I'm going to ask every person I walk into a hospital. I'm going to ask everybody that scenario.
Hey, if I had a bunch of blood on me, would you wash it off, please?
Have you met me? I'll ask anybody anything, basically. I go in there all the time delivering pizzas. They love me. They'll be, hey, by the way, I was watching this film the other day, and is this right? Because, you know, doctors love it when you ask them about medical TV stuff because it's always wrong. And they're always like, that's not how it happens. My brother, who used to fly jets for the Air Force and still is in the Air Force, he'll tell me every technical reason why something is wrong in a film, about how something can't do I mean, you're kind of like that too, to be honest with you. Something you might see that is not technically correct. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, you're right. It's for dramatic purposes, and it's just a small, minor question I had, but it can be answered easily now that I think about it. Maybe when he's gone to his house, his safe house, whatever you want to call it, maybe he thinks he's alone, he's going to be alone, and maybe he just thinks he needs to take out whoever that person might be, or maybe he doesn't. He thinks that they don't know where he is. They don't know where that house is.
Yeah, maybe he thinks that. In fact, that segment of the movie is called Chapter 2, Dominican Republic, The Hideout. So that's a hideout for him. So he probably didn't think that they even knew that he had a hideout, or even that he had a girlfriend. Maybe he didn't think that they knew he had a girlfriend. But of course, They did. So, I mean, that's another way to explain it away. So did you notice that he really didn't have a lot of lines in this movie? And you've already kind of like brought up Baby Driver. And I think that there's kind of like a line, there's kind of a lineage for this film. I think that the more recent group of these movies are this movie, The Killer, Baby Driver, and Drive are all kind of like unnamed main characters, because this character doesn't have a real name. I don't even know. Is he credited as the killer? I didn't actually see. But either way,
it says The Killer in IMDb, but that's just in his photo.
There you go. So that, and then you've got Baby Driver, and then you've also got the driver in Drive, who doesn't have a name, played by Ryan Gosling, and all those kind of like.
Wait, I thought he did have a name.
Nope.
Hot ass driver. No, that's not his name. Okay.
Okay.
Have you seen that movie? Good Lord.
No, I mean, it's very, yeah. I mean, everybody's,
Sorry,
Carey Mulligan is definitely,
I'm turning red.
Like, taking the other end. Yeah, too.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so that, yeah. But each of those movies are kind of like reliant on this character who's like, the less they say, the better for the movie's sake. And I think that we've already even talked about Le Samurai, which was the Melville film. And I think they all kind of like owe, at least their spiritual descendants of that film, as far as like the wardrobes and all of that stuff. It's like they have specific wardrobes. I mean, Le Samurai in this movie are definitely linked, because it's the same. I mean, he's an assassin, somebody who doesn't talk very much. Something happens that shouldn't have happened in Le Samurai. It's the person who saw him commit a crime or it's an assassination. He has to kind of like figure out his alibi from there. But then there's also another movie that I haven't seen that's really hard to see, I guess, called The Driver, starring Ryan O'Neal, that is very similar, where you have somebody who's kind of like doesn't talk a lot, has a very specific set of skills, for lack of a better term, and he's caught in a kind of like a tight situation. And so that movie came out in the late 70s, and I think a lot of these movies have drawn from that. Whatever it is, like steely-eyed main character trying to work through these situations. But it's interesting because we can so easily kind of focus in on the movies that are coming out now. But when we look back, we see that there's all of these inspirations from other films, and it's really neat to be able to see how the characters are still kind of the same, but the films and the way the films are shot and how the parts of the characters that they focus on may be a little bit different, but ultimately it's the same stories.
I said that in the beginning, remember? I said all the way down to the ground beef and the sleeping pills. That's how everybody puts a dog to sleep. And I'm not saying that they're similar for any other reason other than it's an effective tool. It's an effective way to make the audience believe that dog, who you don't want to be 5 feet near without a fence between you. I mean, that is a vicious acting dog. And by the way, you said earlier about him messing up. I said I think it just miscalculates certain things. The sleeping pills inside the meat is a miscalculation because the dog wakes up. But when he sees that dog, when he comes around the corner, he's startled by it. And then he realizes the dog is sleeping, but he still steps very easily around that dog. So on some level, he knew that this was an approximation, that this could have been miscalculated. I'm surprised he just didn't load it up. I think the reason why, well, obviously because the dog has to come back awake, but also nobody wants to see somebody putting 100 pills into a ground beef because they would kill the dog probably, and nobody would like that. So, but it's also, you're expecting a Point Break moment where the dog comes running after him. He has to throw him over and stuff like that. If you've ever seen Point Break, there's a great chase sequence and a pit bull. Without giving anything away, it's really clever what they do. And it's like, wow, never seen that before. And it's sort of similar in this film. But the point is, I'm not sure he's messing it up. I think it's miscalculations. And I think ever since his emotional territory was revealed when he sees her in the hospital, when he sees the girlfriend in the hospital, the sister, for lack of a better term, because that's the only word that's ever used to identify her, by, I take it, the brother, when they're talking to each other. And he says to him, I promise you this will never happen again. First of all, that's the only thing I believe that man said was the truth. That I believed was going to be the truth for the rest of his life and her life and their life. But I think his emotional resolve, or his emotional territory is a good word for it, has got him in such a place that he's not calculating things the way that he might be calculating them before this misfire, before this missed shot. And then that just sends him in a spiral. And it also humanizes him on some level, as much as you can humanize somebody who can turn off their emotion to the fact that they can just kill somebody for money, which Tilda Swinton mentions how easy it was for her to do. So the point to it is that it'll be interesting to watch. And I've not seen Mank again, but I would watch that again. And I've seen Girl with the Dragon Tattoo a couple of times, including that back-to-back with the original. Remember, I saw like a half an hour and then watched a half an hour of the original and went all the way through. I'm not sure about Gone Girl, what I'm getting to, and I'm definitely not sure about Zodiac, but this is one of those films when it was over with that I went, I will want to explore this again. I can feel it. It would not leave me alone. From the moment I turned it off the first time it was like 3 or 4 days later that I did the soundtrack thing. And then 2 days later that I did the segment thing, it would not leave me alone. And when I first turned the film off, I thought, okay, that was that. It's right there. That's all I need to know about it. But it just kept coming at me, and I kept going, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that philosophy is interesting. That theme's interesting, because we really haven't talked about the life philosophies that are inside his rules. He's talking about life in general and how to run your life. And he has a bunch of different philosophies about, or theories of how to run his...
They're maxims is what you would call them. They're like very specific, like rigid rules of like, this is what you do, this is what you don't do, stick to the plan, redundancies. Like that's what he is going through at the beginning of the film. But by the end of the film, he ends up saying like the only life path is the one behind you. And he ends up saying like, you could be in the minority of these people who have this rigid view of life, or you could be in the majority like me. So they're trying to do like a kind of like a, he's changed type of a thing, which I can see that. But my big question for you, and maybe this is where we can kind of like end the podcast, is do you think there's going to be more The Killer movies? Do you think that's even a thing that David Fincher or Michael Fassbinder are even wanting to entertain?
Well, okay. Well, let's first address his change. It is spoken by the lawyer that he has enough money over and over. Oh, he says you have enough money to like go away. Yeah. So why didn't you just go away? Because you did what you did to his girlfriend. So what would be the motivation for a character to come back for a second film? Let me quickly say, do you know what I'm getting ready to say?
Probably. Go.
What am I going to say?
Well, I mean, there's so many movies about, John Wick, the whole thing is based on this.
Right. Well, Over a Dog, which I think is brilliant. That's why I took to that movie, because I was like, this is about revenge over a death of a dog. I love this. I'm
in.
That's my dad and I were like, of course he would. Of course. No. Remember when I said Knives Out was a single movie and only should be a single movie, and that there shouldn't be anything else? And, that's a big piece of humble pie I ate when Glass Onion came out, because I said that was better than the original. Yeah. So I was shoving that humble pie. Do I think it's an interesting exploration? Let me side note. I still think somebody who is like a gazillionaire should give David Fincher money to make the second and third part of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I do. Because what he did with the first one, even though it did make money, that's a stupid excuse not to explore the next two. Not my money, but like somebody needs to give him the blank check that will allow him to explore that artistic avenue. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think I don't think it's a question I ever would have thought of unless you had asked it. Do I think it's a necessity? No. I think everything we need to know about this character and about what the philosophy of this character is and what well, you'll have to take different things per every time you watch the film. I'm going to learn new things about what I think the film is about. Because at first I thought it was this. And then the second time I was like, no, it's this. And then the third time it's this. So there's going to be a lot of different things. I don't know if Fincher is that guy who would do that. And I also don't know if this is the character he should do it with.
Yeah.
Lisbeth, that's the character he should do it with. That's based on two other, well, if this is a graphic novel and this has other stories.
I think that there's more stories, and I don't know if this is directly pulled from, that's the other thing, is I haven't read the graphic novels, but I know that it's a little bit more than just like a single comic book. It's a much bigger, more compendium type thing, because it's like super expensive if you want to buy it like on actual paper. It's like $60, but
that's nothing.
Okay, well, I don't do
that's
graphic novels
nothing. That's like a third of what I wanted to spend on this combination of, well, you could call it a graphic novel, but it's a bunch of different comic books, if you will, the Flashpoint, which is a combination over a time, and it was like $150 or something like that. I was like, but if I had the money,
I'm still thinking about it.
I mean. Those are the things I dream about when you see the $585 million. And I think, well, why not me? It's got to be somebody, right? And the first thing I think of is taking care of all my friends. But that sounds like a really sweet thing, but it's not for altruistic reasons. It's because if I lose all my money because I go crazy, then you have to take care of me because I gave you money. I got it all worked out. And the second thing I would do is
preservation.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you kidding me? Kyle, I lost I'm one of those, I had $1 million lottery winner who lost all their money stories, but you have to, I'll build a house in the back of your house so I'll have a place to live. And then you have to take care of me because I'm going to be crazy at that point. And then I would give money to all the theaters I've ever worked with. And I'm talking about loads of money. And then I start to think about things like the graphic novels that I just don't buy because of my finances. All the Kiss costumes I want recreated that are going to be on mannequins and all the different Kiss rooms that I'm going to have in my house. You think I'm kidding? How fast did that come out of my mouth? Because I think that's how I think about it. Anyway, the point is, to your question, I'm not sure that is something Fincher should consider, or it even fits with anything I know about him up to this point. Now, if he wanted to do like a Netflix TV show, like House of Cards that he was involved in at first, and he wants to do something like that based on this graphic novel with maybe a different actor or a different scenario or a different actress or whatever, then maybe. But I think what he put on film, as clinical as it is, it's got good bookends and it sits on the shelf just right. I wouldn't say it's a perfect movie, but it's perfect for what it is. And I appreciate that. I love that. By the way, when I was talking about all the things, all his philosophies, I started to think about all the things he was saying in the film when you were talking. And I thought that sounds a lot like my brain when I'm trying to learn a part for a play. Stick to this page. Do not turn the page until you've learned this monologue. Don't look at her. It's very similar. And I thought, well, maybe this is, either a comparison to Psychosis and something about being an artist and being, I won't say psychotic because I don't think I'm psychotic. I don't know. What do you think? No. Okay. No.
Okay. So you all agree. Okay, good. I'm glad.
He's in disagreement, but she's cool. So we're good. We'll talk to him later. Okay. Anyway, it's an interesting question though. I'm glad you posed it, and I will think about it and I will come up with an answer when it happens. But I am never going to make that mistake again. They should only do one Knives Out. What?
Well, I think for me, like selfishly, I want David Fincher to do other things. So I would say, like, if it was just me and I got to decide what David Fincher did next, I would say do something else. But I mean, at the same time, you're right. There may be another avenue for this. It just makes me wonder if there's any more minerals to mine out of this story or out of this setup, because from what I've seen, like the graphic novel is very well renowned and it's something that obviously engaged him and Andrew Kevin Walker way back in the mid 2000s. They were talking about this, and it's finally gotten to the point where it seems like him working for Netflix, he's been able to be like, they've been like, what do you want to do? And he's like, hey, I've got a script from my dad from 20 years ago. Let's do that. And they're like, okay. And he's like, hey, I've got this movie from a French graphic novel that I've wanted to do from 15 years ago. And they're like, okay. So I don't know what else he's got, you know.
I am an ailing, dying billionaire. I shall bequeath my money to David Fincher to do The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest and whatever the middle one was called. I can't remember what the middle one's called.
With Fire.
Yes, I love it. I love all three of them. So anyway, if the female, the sister, the girlfriend did not or died in this one,
her name is Magdala. That's her name. So she does have a name. I don't know if he ever calls her Magdala, but
I remember somebody does. Somebody does.
Yeah.
And you remember how you're talking about people who, because the protagonist, if you will, the killer didn't speak so much that other people in the scene did. Kelly O'Malley, Carrie O'Malley, who plays Dolores, superb.
She's so good.
So she should be so proud of herself. She's so good in this, and because you honestly are believing she's going to fare better than most, and when she does that typical, I'm really a good person, I really believed her. And then I was in the shower once going, wait a second. She set up, she knows where that murderer's number is. She knows where that guy's number is. She knows where Tilda Swinton is. She knows these are bad people, and she knows what she's doing is bad. And of course she's trying to confess her sins at the end of her life. But I actually thought she would survive based on her performance. So anyway, Magdala, if she had died in this, maybe that would be a reason to continue on with this particular actor, this particular director, maybe. Because where's the end of this movie if she doesn't survive? So there's 1,000 things I loved about this film, but I love that Fincher's films distinctly look like Fincher films. Him and Steven Soderbergh, they have this gold, bronze, copper feel about their films. It's like a dirty copper tone, and then all of a sudden this stark blue. And they both use similar tones in their films. Steven Soderbergh usually uses a glitzier, kind of sharper color, but in the plane, the first plane he gets on, and he's looking at the guy and he's trying to see if that guy. Yeah. Look at that scene again. The browns and the coppers and the blues are mesmerizing. And I'm so happy that people have such an artistic idea of what they want, that those colors are what he sticks to, and the way he uses them are amazing. So there's 1,000 things to talk about, but it's something that struck me. I think if you dropped me off in the middle of this film and somebody said, who directed this film? I might go, David Fincher. Immediately you can just, it almost feels physical. Like it feels like you can touch his films and they have a texture to them. That's not usual. That's why he's an auteur. That's why it doesn't matter whether or not he writes his screenplays, because he, without a shadow of a doubt, has such a distinct thumbprint. You can see the grooves, the fingerprints in his films. You can see it. And we are the better for it, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think ever since he went to digital filmmaking, Zodiac on, he's figured out a way, even with multiple cinematographers, he's figured out a way to, there's a way that he wants a room to look. There's a way that he wants lighting to look, and there's a way that he wants the ambiance of a scene to be. And he's going to make it happen, whether it's Jeff Cronenweth or Eric Messerschmidt or, Harris Savitas or whoever he's working with, he's going to make it work.
Who's he working with on this one? I looked it up.
It's Eric Messerschmidt, the same guy who did his episodes of, I think he did all of Mindhunter, both seasons, and then he did Mank, and he won an Academy Award for it. And he also did this movie, The Killer. And at the same time, he was doing Ferrari for Michael Mann, which is yet to come out. So we'll get to see Eric Messerschmidt's work in a couple of months.
And Mank that's the only Oscar they won, right?
I believe they won production design also.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Believe so. But
because I thought it was like going to be nominated for everything and didn't win, but won.
Yeah, that's kind of the how the Academy deals with David Fincher and Fincher movies. Is it's nominated for everything and it doesn't win anything, or it wins certain, certain tangential awards. It will definitely, like, it's multiple times editors have won. In fact, two years in a row for Social Network and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, his editors won Academy Awards for that. And of course, Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor won.
Right, I knew
Social
that.
Network.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. And listen, we have the same conversation. When Fincher wins his Best Director Oscar or wins, hey,
he doesn't need to.
Can you not? I'm not saying he does.
He doesn't need to. It's okay.
You
fine.
have a tone in your back of your voice where you feel, it sounds like you feel sad that the Academy hasn't honored him yet. I'm telling you, when it happens, and it will happen, okay? It will happen. I'm an Oscar god.
He's in good company. Look at him right now. He's in good company. He's in good company with Stanley Kubrick.
Kubrick has an Oscar.
Not for directing. He's got an Oscar for Best Visual Effects for 2001. That's it. Which is fine. That doesn't take anything away from Kubrick movies. Like, it's okay. Like, it's fine. It really does not bother me. It's fine. The Academy Awards aren't like as like, I don't internalize them as much as you do, I think.
But they don't weigh as much as everybody thinks that they weigh for me. I'm enthralled by the idea of people being at the top of the game that they're playing. The mastery it takes for somebody. We've talked about this a million times. The Oscars are an educational tool for me for things that I might not have heard of, might not have seen, might not have gone to per se, because I'm going to a bunch of other things. When it's nominated for an Oscar, it kind of gives me an indication, I should check that out. And I've seen a gazillion million things. That's an actual number. Where I am so much happier because I saw 45 years. I saw whatever it may be that was nominated for an Oscar and would not have seen it unless the Oscars had pointed it out to me. And now then I know filmmakers because of that and so forth. I just want to say this. When he does win, it will be the movie we will both agree upon that he should have won for. And we will celebrate that film. Yes, this makes sense to me that this was the one, and it could have very easily been Mank. Now,
and that's what I hope will be his future. But at the same time, when you look at Martin Scorsese, who won for The Departed, like, that's not my favorite Scorsese movie. Like, it's just not. It's not even in like top 5, maybe. So it's like it feels like that win was kind of like we gotta give him something sometime. And then since then he's made Killers of Flower Moon, he's made The Irishman, he's made Silence,
Wolf of Wall Street. Yeah,
he's made Wolf of Wall Street. He should have won for that.
Yeah, I agree with you. But he was actually that nomination was unexpected. Most people didn't think he was going to get that nomination, but when he got it, I was like, yeah, have you seen the movie? Okay, The Departed, really quick, has aged really well. It has aged really well as a Martin Scorsese classic. It has aged really well in the minds of people who think that he only won because he's Martin Scorsese, and that's perfectly fine that might be the reason why he won. It does not make that film any less great. Is it in my top 5? I don't know. I would have to think about that. I've never really thought about that before because there's so many. Like, how could you even begin with the top? My brain is exploding a little bit trying to figure out what my top 5 Scorsese films are. But just because he didn't win for Taxi Driver or Raging Bull doesn't make whoever did win, that person achieved something great too. Just because the film that you thought should have won didn't win doesn't make the film that did win bad. It just doesn't. And did they give it to him because he's Martin Scorsese? Maybe. Will they give it to him because he's David Fincher? I don't know. They're two different careers.
What I mean. Like, so that's what I mean. Like, so that whatever that movie is that he wins Best Director for is going to have to be it's going to have to rise above to some sort of level that is going to have to meet all the people in the Academy where they are. But I don't know if David Fincher is necessarily interested in meeting people from the Academy where they are.
Not at all. So, No. I think he's completely capable of making a David Fincher film to his tier of level of what he thinks he wants to achieve. And everybody else will follow when that right movie comes along. It won't just be, he will never do that. He has proven it since Alien 3. He's never going to comply. He's never going to conform. He's never going to do any of that stuff. I don't know him. I'm saying from what I've read and what I've seen and what I've heard from him, he's just not that guy. And look at the career he's had since, because he has not done what he was told to do and refused to do I'm going to do what I think is right. And actually the director's cut is a better cut of that film, Alien 3, with the exception of 1 or 2 scenes. But overall, it's a better cut. And if they knew who Fincher was going to become, they would have shut up and let him do that film, and there would be no problems. But then again, we wouldn't have Fincher that we have now, because then he wouldn't have the sandpaper to rub up against. I just have full faith that when people click into things, Parasite, Everything Everywhere All at Once, yes, they're recent, but those are also ones that you said along the way, I can't see this happening. I can't see 3 acting Oscars coming from the butt plug movie.
You're right.
Right.
I said
that. Yeah, but it has happened. Anyway, I have full faith that people, they see things maybe at their own time, but the convergence of greatness when it comes to art seems to be recognized when it's supposed to be recognized, mostly. And I think it will happen with Fincher. I have full faith it will happen with Fincher, and it never does. It doesn't matter. You're absolutely right. Yeah, Richard Burton has 8 nominations and not a win. Richard Dreyfuss won over Richard Burton, which I love, The Goodbye Girl. But some people might say that's not as heavy and that's not as textural as the movie that Richard Burton was nominated for. That said, he doesn't have an Oscar. So you're right. It doesn't matter in the long run, but it sure is a hell of a lot of fun to talk about.
That's true. All right. Well, that's a good place to end it, I think. You can check us out on the web at actorengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorengineer, and you can go to YouTube. Just search for the Actor and the Engineer podcast, and we'll be there.